Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There's a moment, and maybe you've already had it, where you're standing in your own kitchen, coffee going cold in your hand, and the house is so quiet you can hear the refrigerator hum. And somewhere in that quiet, a thought creeps in that you don't say out loud to anyone. Not to your sister, not to your doctor, maybe not even to God. Is this it? Is this all there is left for me? Don't look away from that. Stay with me here for just a moment, because that thought, that terrifying, lonely 3 a.m. in the middle of the afternoon thought, is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something is waking up in you. And I think you already know that. That's why you're here. I want to talk to you today about something most people won't touch with a 10-foot pole. We'll call it the final chapter. Not because life is ending, but because something old is. And that distinction, that's everything. Here's what nobody tells women like us. And I say us because I've been in that kitchen too. I've had that cold coffee. I've felt the weight we carry when the roles we spent decades filling start to shift and blur at the edges. Nobody warns you that the thing you might grieve most in your 50s, 60s, and 70s isn't a person, and it isn't your health, and it isn't even time. It's a version of yourself you never fully got to be. Let that land. Somewhere along the way, between the carpools and the casseroles, between the parent-teacher conferences and the performance reviews, between holding everyone else together and quietly falling apart at the seams, you put something down, a dream, a desire, a way of moving through the world that felt uniquely, irreducibly yours. And you told yourself you'd come back for it. Later, when things settled down, when the kids were older, when work slowed, when fill in the blank finally happened, and now here you are. And the house is quiet, and the blank has been filled. And you don't know quite what to do with the woman staring back at you from the mirror. She looks familiar, but she also looks like someone who's been waiting a very long time for permission to show up. I've sat with women in their 60s who describe this feeling as a kind of grief they can't justify. Because nobody died, they say almost apologetically. I've sat with women in their 70s who still dream at night about roads not taken, and then feel guilty for dreaming them. I've talked to women who have everything the world said they should want. The grandchildren, the garden, the retirement, the trip they finally took to Italy, and who still feel this hollow place somewhere behind the sternum that no amount of gratitude journaling seems to quite reach. This is not depression. It's not ingratitude. It's not selfishness, no matter what the quiet whispers in your head keep trying to tell you. This is what it feels like to stand at the threshold of your own becoming and not know it. Here's the hard truth, spoken gently. Most of us were never taught how to inhabit the second half of our lives. We were taught to endure, to give, to shrink thoughtfully, to age gracefully, which so often becomes a polished way of saying disappear quietly and don't make a fuss about it. We were handed scripts for every season of womanhood except this one. Young woman, wife, mother, caregiver, professional. There were rules for all of those, worn in paths through the woods. But this open terrain we're standing in now, no map, no script, just the wind and the weight we carry and this aching, inconvenient, beautiful aliveness still flickering inside us. So before we go any further, I want you to do something, not later, right now. I want you to take one honest breath, not the kind you take in a yoga class, the performative kind, but the kind you take when you're finally alone and you let your shoulders actually drop. The kind where your body goes, oh, okay, we're safe here. Take that breath. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't a list of tips. It isn't a 5-step plan or a morning routine or a mindset hack. What I want to offer you is something far more radical and far more simple than any of that. I want to offer you permission. Permission to grieve what was lost without calling it weakness. Permission to want more without calling it greed. Permission to begin, truly begin, even now, especially now. Because here's what I know to be true deep in my bones, after years of listening to women in the most honest moments of their lives, the final chapter is not the chapter where the story winds down. It's the chapter where the story finally tells the truth. There's something almost sacred about finally naming a thing, not fixing it, not reframing it, not rushing past it toward the silver lining that someone on the internet promised was waiting on the other side. Just naming it, sitting down across from it like an old acquaintance you've been avoiding at the grocery store, and finally saying, I see you. I know what you are. So that's what we're going to do right now. Together. Because before any real healing can begin, before any true becoming, we have to be honest about what we've actually been carrying. And most of us have been carrying it so long we don't even feel the weight anymore. We just feel tired. We just feel vaguely, persistently, inexplicably tired. Let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with the question rather than answering it too quickly. When was the last time you did something not for your children, not for your partner, not for a friend who needed you, not out of obligation or love or duty, but purely, selfishly, joyfully for you? When was the last time you followed a feeling somewhere without asking anyone's permission first? Take a moment, really think. If the answer came quickly and easily, I'm genuinely glad. But for most of the women I know, women like you and like me, there's a long pause before that answer. Sometimes the pause is so long it turns into tears you weren't expecting. Sometimes the pause is the answer. That pause has a name, and its name is loss. We talk a lot in our culture about the losses that come with age. The physical ones, the knees that ache, the reading glasses on every surface of the house, the name that hovers just out of reach on the tip of your tongue. Those losses are real, and they deserve their space. But I want to talk about the quieter ones, the ones that don't show up in any medical chart. The unspoken truths we fold up small and tuck away because there doesn't seem to be a socially acceptable place to put them. The loss of invisibility, and I mean that in the cruelest, most unexpected way. Because there's a strange, disorienting moment that happens to women somewhere in this season of life. You walk into a room and something has shifted. The world, which once looked at you, sometimes in ways you didn't even want, has started to look through you. And nobody prepared you for how much that would sting. Not because you needed to be seen in that particular way, but because you are still here, fully, vibrantly here. And the world's gaze has moved on. The loss of the future self you were always saving yourself for. The version of you who was going to write the book, take the class, move to the coast, fall in love again, learn Italian, be brave. She kept getting postponed. And now the postponements have started to feel permanent. And somewhere underneath the practicality of daily life, there's a small grief about that woman, the unlived version of yourself, that nobody ever asks about at Thanksgiving dinner, the loss of your mother or your father, the people who, even if they were complicated, even if the relationship was hard, were the ones who remembered you when you were small, the ones who held the early chapters of your story that nobody else witnessed. When they're gone, something about your own history becomes strangely unverifiable. You become, in some quiet way, the oldest version of yourself. The loss of certainty, of your body doing what you told it to do, of knowing who you are outside of what you do for people, of the blueprint you thought you were following until the blueprint simply ran out of page. I want to say something here that I need you to really hear, because we live in a world that is very uncomfortable with grief, that doesn't have a funeral attached to it. You are allowed to mourn these things. You don't need a diagnosis to justify your sorrow. You don't need to have had it worse than someone else to earn the right to feel the loss. Grief doesn't need a permission slip, and it doesn't grade on a curve. Whatever you've lost, named or unnamed, witnessed or invisible, it matters. It happened to you, and that alone makes it worthy of acknowledgement. The cruelest thing we do to women in this season of life, and we do it to ourselves more than anyone else does it to us, is demand that we be grateful instead of honest, as though the two are in opposition, as though you can't hold your gratitude for the life you've had in one hand and your grief for the parts that got away in the other, as though being a woman of faith or of strength or of warmth means you forfeit the right to say, some of this has been really, really hard. You can be grateful, and you can be heartbroken, both at the same time. That's not contradiction. That's the full, complicated, beautiful truth of being human at this age. Here's where it gets interesting, and I mean genuinely interesting, not the forced, positive kind of interesting that makes you want to close the browser tab. Psychology has known for decades what most of us are only just beginning to feel our way toward intuitively. There is a developmental stage, a legitimate, scientifically recognized stage of human growth, that happens specifically in the second half of life. The psychologist Carl Jung called it individuation. Erik Erikson called it generativity versus stagnation. The researcher Brene Brown calls it the reckoning. The names are different. The finding is the same. This season you're in right now, this unsettled, searching, sometimes grief-soaked, sometimes wildly alive feeling you can't quite name, is not a malfunction. It is not you falling apart. It is, in the deepest possible sense, you being called toward the most authentic version of yourself you have ever had the chance to become. The losses we've been naming, they're not just endings. They are, if we let them be, a kind of clearing. And something can only be cleared if something new is meant to grow there. I know that can sound like a greeting card. I know how hollow those words can ring when you're still standing in the rubble of what's been lost. So I'm not asking you to rush toward the hope. I'm just asking you to stay. To not leave yourself in the middle of this story before you see where it's actually going. Because the weight we carry, all of it, the grief, the unlived dreams, the invisible losses, the exhaustion of being everything to everyone for so long, that weight doesn't have to be permanent. It can be set down. Not forgotten, not erased. But set down with care, the way you'd set down something precious that you've held for too long and finally said, I need to rest my arms. You're allowed to rest your arms. That's not giving up. That's not giving in. That's the beginning. There's a particular kind of afternoon light that comes in late autumn. You know the one. It slants through the window at an angle that summer light never quite manages. Lower, slower, more golden somehow. And the strange thing about that light is that it doesn't make things look old. It makes them look illuminated. It catches the dust motes floating in your living room and turns them into something that looks, for just a moment, like it was always meant to be beautiful. I've always thought that's the most honest metaphor for this season of a woman's life that I've ever found. Not the fading, not the dimming, the illuminating. But here's the thing about that autumn light. You have to be willing to look toward it. You have to stop facing the window you used to look out of, the one that showed you spring, the one that showed you the road at its longest and most wide open, and you have to turn. Physically, emotionally, spiritually turn. And face the direction the light is actually coming from now. That turning, that is the hardest and most important thing I'm going to ask of you today. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Margaret. She came to me at 67, 2 years after her husband of 41 years had died, 18 months after her youngest daughter had moved across the country, and about 6 weeks after she'd quietly, without telling anyone, stopped getting out of bed before noon. She wasn't dramatic about any of it. That's what struck me first. She described her life in this careful, measured, almost apologetic tone, as though she was aware she was taking up space in my office that someone with a real problem probably needed more. She told me she had a good life. She told me she had no right to feel the way she felt. She told me she was fine, really. It was just that she didn't quite know what she was for anymore. I don't know what I'm for. I want you to sit with those words, because I've heard some version of them from nearly every woman who has walked through a threshold like the one you're standing at now. And I've come to believe that sentence, that quiet, devastating, completely honest sentence, is not a symptom of despair. It is an invitation. Here's what I told Margaret, and what I want to tell you. The question, what am I for, is only unbearable if you're trying to answer it with the same logic you used for the first half of your life. If you go looking for purpose in the old places, in productivity, in usefulness to others, in the roles and titles and to-do lists that gave you your shape for decades, of course you'll come up empty. Those containers were real and they mattered and they held you well. But they were built for a different season. You can't pour autumn light into a summer jar. The question isn't what am I for? Not anymore. The question, the real revolutionary, terrifying, and gorgeous question of this chapter, is who am I when I'm not being for anyone at all? I know. That question might make you want to laugh a little or deflect or say something like, oh, I'm too old for an identity crisis. That's for 20-somethings. We do that, don't we? We minimize ourselves right when we're on the edge of something true. We joke our way back to safety before the feeling can get too close. But stay with me here, because I'm not talking about navel gazing. I'm not talking about abandoning the people you love or the life you've built. I'm talking about something far more intimate and far more urgent than any of that. I'm talking about the woman who existed before anyone needed anything from her. The girl who had preferences and instincts and a particular way of laughing before the world started requiring things of her that slowly, gently, thoroughly drowned that voice out. She didn't die. She didn't leave. She got quiet, the way a person gets quiet in a room full of noise. Not because they have nothing to say, but because nobody was listening and it hurt too much to keep trying. She's still in there. And this is the season when she finally gets to speak. The turning isn't a single dramatic moment. I want to be honest with you about that. It doesn't arrive wrapped in revelation on a Tuesday morning, though occasionally, for some women, something close to that does happen. A loss, a conversation, a walk in the woods where something just cracks open and the light floods in all at once. For most of us, the turning is slower. It's more like a tide than a lightning strike. It's a series of small, almost imperceptible shifts in attention. You find yourself pausing in front of a painting longer than you used to. You catch yourself humming a song you haven't thought about in 30 years. You read a sentence in a book and something in your chest moves in a way you can't quite explain. You say no to something, politely, firmly, without the elaborate apology you would have attached to that no 5 years ago. And you feel, underneath the mild guilt, a small and startling sense of rightness. Those moments are not accidents. They are not nostalgia. They are your true self sending up flares. The turning begins the moment you decide to pay attention to the flares, instead of explaining them away. There's a beautiful and under-used concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. You've probably heard of post-traumatic stress. The way suffering can wound us, rearrange us, leave marks that don't fully heal. But post-traumatic growth is the other side of that coin, and it's just as real, just as documented, just as human. It's what happens when people who have walked through genuine darkness, loss, grief, illness, displacement, the undoing of everything they thought they knew, emerge not just intact, but enlarged. Not the same as they were. Better isn't quite the right word either. Truer. More fully themselves. More willing to say what they actually think, love what they actually love, stop performing contentment they don't actually feel. More able to sit with uncertainty without needing to resolve it immediately. More capable of the particular, unhurried tenderness that only suffering can teach. Research tells us that women in the second half of life who allow themselves to genuinely process their losses, who don't bypass the grief in a rush toward positivity, report levels of meaning, authenticity, and emotional freedom that are measurably higher than what they experienced in their 30s and 40s. Let me say that again, because I don't want it to slip past you. The women who go through this, not around it, not above it, not with a smile plastered over it, come out the other side freer than they have ever been. That is not wishful thinking. That is the literature. That is decades of research into the human spirit. That is what the data looks like when women finally stop outsourcing their inner lives and come home to themselves. So here is where I want to plant a seed, just one for now. Because the turning doesn't require an overhaul. It doesn't require a dramatic announcement or a vision board or a new wardrobe or moving to Sedona. It requires something much simpler and much braver than any of that. It requires you to build yourself a sanctuary. Not a physical place necessarily, though for some women it is exactly that, a chair by a window, a garden, a room with a door that closes. But I mean a sanctuary in the oldest, truest sense of the word, a protected space, inside yourself first, and then mirrored in your life, where the woman who exists for no one else's benefit is allowed to simply be, to want things, to remember things, to try things, to rest, to begin, where the quiet whispers of your own soul are treated, finally, as worth listening to. You don't build that sanctuary overnight, and no one else can build it for you. But every small act of self-return, every time you choose honesty over performance, every time you follow curiosity without justifying it, every time you treat your own inner life as something worth tending, you lay another stone. And slowly, steadily, something solid starts to take shape. Margaret, by the way, she started painting again. Something she'd stopped at 22 when life got practical and serious. She wasn't very good at first. She'll tell you that herself with a laugh that fills the room. But here's what she told me about 8 months into the turning. I'm not painting for anyone. I'm not even painting for the paintings. I'm painting because it's the first time in 40 years I've done something where the only voice in my head is mine. That's the sanctuary. That's the turning. That's where we're headed. I want to start this last stretch of our conversation with something that might surprise you. I'm not going to tell you to be brave. I know that's what you might be expecting. Some kind of rousing, arms wide, open finale where I send you off into the world with a battle cry and a list of action steps and the emotional equivalent of a standing ovation. And part of me wants to give you that because you deserve it, because you have earned it after everything we've walked through together in this conversation. But I think you've had enough people in your life telling you to be brave. You've been brave. Quietly, consistently, without ceremony or applause, you have been brave for decades. You were brave when you held your family together during things that would have broken other people. You were brave when you swallowed your own needs because someone else's were louder. You were brave in every waiting room, every difficult conversation, every morning you got up and kept going when keeping going was the hardest thing on earth. You don't need more bravery. What you need, what this final chapter actually asks of you, is something quieter and in some ways more radical than bravery has ever been. It asks you to be honest. Honest about what you want. Not what you think you should want at this age, not what looks right from the outside, not what requires the least explanation at Sunday dinner. What you actually, in the marrow of your bones, want. Honest about what no longer fits. The relationships that drain more than they fill. The obligations you took on 15 years ago that you've outgrown. The version of yourself you've been maintaining carefully and exhaustingly for an audience that may not even be watching anymore. Honest about what still lights you up, even if it's small, even if it's embarrassing, even if it makes no practical sense whatsoever. The thing that makes time go strange when you're doing it. The conversation that leaves you feeling more like yourself than you've felt all week. The book, the place, the music, the memory that reaches into you and touches something that hasn't been touched in a very long time. That thing. That flickering, inconvenient, beautiful thing. That is not a distraction from your life. That is the directions back to it. I want to talk about identity for a moment. Not in a clinical way, but in the way it actually feels when you're living inside it. There's a phenomenon that psychologists sometimes call role exit. The experience of losing or leaving a primary identity that has defined you for a long period of time. Mothers experience it when children leave. Professionals experience it at retirement. Caregivers experience it when the person they cared for is gone. And what makes role exit so quietly devastating is that it doesn't just take the role, it takes the self-concept that was wrapped around it. When you've been someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's dependable one, someone's rock, for long enough, those roles don't just describe what you do. They describe who you are. And when they shift or end or hollow out, the question that's left behind isn't just what do I do now? It's who am I now? And here's the thing I want you to hold on to. The thing I want you to carry with you long after this conversation has ended. That question is not a crisis. That question is a canvas. Because here is what I know about women in this season. And I mean this not as a comfort, but as a clinical and personal and spiritual truth that I have witnessed more times than I can count. The women who allow themselves to sit with that question, who resist the urge to fill the silence with business or worry or the needs of others, who stay long enough in the uncertainty to actually hear what comes back. Those women become someone extraordinary. Not extraordinary in the way the world usually means that word, not famous or accomplished or publicly recognized. Extraordinary in the quietest and most important sense. They become whole. They become the women who walk into a room and make other people feel more like themselves just by being there. They become the ones whose presence is a kind of sanctuary for everyone around them, not because they've made themselves small and available, but because they've finally made themselves real. They become, in the truest sense of the word, themselves. And the world, their particular, intimate, irreplaceable corner of the world, is better for it. Measurably, palpably, undeniably better. So what does the becoming actually look like? What does it feel like on an ordinary Wednesday in your ordinary life? It looks like saying I need some time alone today and not offering a reason. It looks like signing up for the class, or the trip, or the group, or the conversation, even though you don't know anyone, even though it's been years, even though a small voice in your head says, "Who do you think you are?" starting something new at this age. It looks like answering that voice, not out loud, unless that's your style, with something gentle and firm. I am someone who is not finished yet. That's who I think I am. It looks like tending your inner life with the same devotion you've spent a lifetime giving to everyone else's. Reading what feeds you. Resting without guilt. Crying when you need to cry, without talking yourself out of it. Laughing loudly at things that are genuinely funny to you, without monitoring the volume. It looks like letting people see you more fully than feels comfortable. Because the deepest human longing, at any age, but perhaps most urgently at this one, is not to be needed, it's to be known. And you cannot be known while you are performing. You can only be known when you are present, unguarded, and genuinely unapologetically you. I want to address something head on, because I know it's sitting in the back of the room of this conversation, waiting. Some of you are thinking about time. You're doing the quiet, involuntary arithmetic that we all do at this age. The calculating of years behind and years ahead, the measuring of what's been used and what might remain. And there's a voice, maybe barely a whisper, maybe louder than that, saying it's too late. The window has closed. This conversation is lovely, but it's for someone younger, someone with more runway, not for me, not now. I want to sit directly across from that voice and look it in the eye, because that voice is lying to you, not out of malice, out of fear. Out of the accumulated weight of every message you've ever received that told you women of a certain age are past their season of becoming, that reinvention is for the young, that the story is essentially told, and now it's just a matter of the ending. But here is what the research actually says. Here is what the women I've known who are 72 and 75 and 80 say, the ones who took the turning, who built the sanctuary, who let themselves become. They don't say they started too late. They say they wish they'd started sooner. But they also say, every single one of them, that it wasn't too late when they started. It was never too late. It is not too late now. The present moment, this one, the one you're in right now, reading these words, is the only moment becoming has ever been possible in. Not the past, where you're busy grieving. Not the future, where you're busy worrying. Right now. This unremarkable, completely ordinary, utterly irreplaceable moment. This is where it begins. I want to leave you with something, not a challenge, not a homework assignment, not a call to action that's going to sit in your inbox and make you feel guilty for not completing it. Just an image. A small, quiet image that I hope you'll carry with you. Picture a woman. She's somewhere between 60 and 75. She's sitting in a chair by a window. Maybe the chair you're sitting in right now, maybe one like it. The light is coming in at that autumn angle we talked about. And she's not doing anything remarkable. She's not conquering anything. She's just sitting there with a cup of something warm, and she looks peaceful is not quite the right word. She looks present. She looks like someone who has walked through the grief and the loss and the long years of giving herself away in pieces and has come out the other side with something she didn't have before. She looks like someone who knows exactly who she is. Not because life got easier. Not because the losses stopped. Not because the questions all got answered. But because she stopped waiting for all of that to happen before she let herself live. She stopped treating her own existence as a rough draft. She picked up the pen, and she started writing the truest thing she'd ever written. That woman is not a fantasy. She is not an aspiration. She is not someone else's story. She is you, on the other side of the turning, in the middle of the becoming, living the final chapter, not as an ending, but as the place where the story finally tells the truth. You've carried the weight long enough. Set it down and begin.